So, Christoph, should we buy a house?
Well, I mean, we together for sure should buy a house. I always wanted to live in a community. But the broader question, of course, is like, is it financially and emotionally a sound decision for people to buy a house? And we decided to cover this like very specific thing as one of the yearly Euzoia posts. Because for most people, that's the biggest financial decision they're taking in their lives. It might feel small, like I guess it never feels small, but it might feel smaller because basically you're trading your renting for like rent payments for a mortgage payment, but you are taking a very big responsibility. And in this kind of episode, we want to tease this apart a little bit. And of course, the answer is always, it depends, right? Like on a high level, it's not like you're throwing money away when you're renting how it's off portrayed, right? Like what you're doing is you're paying fees to somebody else to get freedom, to not have financial responsibility, and like all the hassle that comes with like owning a house. And that comes sometimes at a premium. Sometimes it's actually even cheaper than buying a house. So yeah, how to think about this? I think the first lens to think about this is just like comparing side by side the financials of renting versus buying. To do this, the most naive way that can already get you quite far is to say, okay, like what if I would just invest the money and like completely look at it like an investment, right? And then let's say you invest, you buy a house that's 500,000. You could take these 500,000 and also like invest them in something else. So what's the expected return of buying this? You can very easily calculate this, right? Like look at what the house price is that you're looking to buy. Look at what equivalent rentals are, and you'll find them. Then take the rental price times 12. That's like the yearly rental price, and divide it by the house price. This is basically the equivalent annual return you would get. And this varies massively by market. Like in some markets, it's like 3%, which is a pretty bad investment if you would just invest in it for the investment case, because 3% you can almost get in like savings accounts. No, then you don't have to buy houses. In other markets, it's much, much, much higher. And this already is a very first good guesstimate to kind of get a feel for what's going on. And you can even do this in your head or on your iPhone very quickly, right? I did this for Amsterdam, and turns out in Amsterdam, it's not a really good investment because people buy houses in Amsterdam for like all kinds of other reasons. And usually in big cities, it's always, just from this like rent perspective, a bad idea. And of course, it's more than just that, right? It's like, what kind of mortgage can you get? What's actually you don't just have 500,000 euros, right? You have to get a mortgage for this. The market interest rates, like how do they compare? What are the costs of having this house? And it gets like super complicated. Luckily, there's calculators for this on the internet, right? So you can just, in the blog post at euzoia.org, I like linked some, like Nerd Wallet has a good one. There's one for like different European countries. And what I would suggest is like just take a mortgage calculator from your local bank to like figure out what kind of mortgage you could get, plug it into this thing, and then just play around with the numbers. And like these calculators seem very like specific. It's like clearly renting is better or buying is better by like 2,534.2 cents, which obviously is wrong because there's 100 assumptions in these things. But the fun thing that you can do is play with those assumptions, right? Like play with the sensitivities, right? Like if I would get mortgage at a different rate, or if I would get like cheaper rent a different house. And through this, you can already kind of get a feeling for, just from a financial perspective, does it make sense to own or to rent, to even think about this? Then in a second step, when you start doing this sensitivity analysis, most likely what you'll find is that the biggest impact on like these calculators on if it makes sense to rent or to buy or like what the financial impact is how you think the market will develop, right? Like, because what you're doing in a way is you take massive leverage, right? In the last post, we talked about leverage. The biggest way, the easiest way to get rich is just like take big bets with massive leverage, right? Like basically on a house, you put like 10% down and you get 90% from the bank. And with this 100%, you can then take a bet. And in this case, the bet you take is the house price is going to rise. If you're right, like, it's going to be amazing because you all of a sudden get returns for 10x of what you put in. The problem is if you're not right, then you make massive losses. House prices like tend to go up. They also, kind of depending where you live, tend to not. Side has been a bad investment, I think. Could think of demographic change, like house prices in Ukraine, probably also not as high as they used to be pre-war. All kinds of things that can happen. And you basically take this like 20, 30 horizon where you try to predict house prices. This is hard. And so when you're thinking of like, should I do this or not? I think this is almost the more important lens than
Yeah.
thinking about, is it like on the margin now, like a bit better than like this, like rent versus buy calculation? No, I think the real question is like, are you willing to take a massive bet on the future of this housing market with money from the bank? And when we already talked last time about like when it makes sense to take bets, like you should take bets when you can afford to lose. So like think about the downside. You should take bets when you can diversify. So if you put all of your money in this house and then kind of become house poor, where the only thing that you do is like pay off your mortgage and
Yeah.
like nothing else, no savings, no investments, no like low consumption, this is probably kind of and then subprime happens, right? Then you have a problem, right? Like, so you don't want to be in that situation. And one other way to think about this kind of leverage situation is when you get a mortgage, like try to optimize for high loan to value ratio, right? So that means for as little as you can be put in, you get kind of percentage, like relatively like a lot of mortgage. And then because you put in very little, maybe you can use the remaining amount to like diversify, do some other stuff, and basically don't be like all in the house, which
Yeah.
happens for a lot of people because as status, it's what they want. Yeah, does it make sense so far?
It makes sense. Yeah. It's interesting the framing of it's you're basically kind of betting on the housing market, early. And for most people, they will be putting in most of their money into something like that.
Yeah, I talked with a friend who recently bought a house, and she was like, sign this kind of contract, and it has like this massive number on there, and you're like, is this rational what I'm doing right now? Like, is this sane? But like everybody else is doing it, so like,
Yeah.
surely this is fine, right? And like
Yeah.
on some level, like surely this is fine, right? But like on like from this like leverage perspective, I think it does really make sense to think this through.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this kind of then leads to the last lens that I think it makes sense to look at this with, right? Like, and that's like lifestyle, well-being, like how you feel about it, right? Like we already said last time, like loss aversion is a thing, right? Like you feel much worse when you lose money than when you win money. If you're highly leveraged, like this gets even more extreme, right? Like you can like lose a lot relatively,
Mm.
or you could win a lot, and you probably don't want to lose a lot like relatively. So really looking into the downside scenario and trying to figure out like how can I make sure even if I do this, I'll be fine if it goes wrong, right? This is step one. Then step two is I think just seeing like which emotions actually play a role in this decision, right? Like I think you can like take those calculations as long as you want, but at the end of the day, I think for me, I can only talk about myself, right? But like emotions that play a role is like FOMO. Like if all my friends around me are like buying houses and then all of them get lucky in the market and all of them like all of a sudden get like 100,000 euros extra just because they bought a house. Like I feel FOMO. Whereas like if everybody loses money together, it's like you can kind of bond over this kind of it feels like okay, right? Like there's
Yeah.
like in the Netherlands, they have this postcode lottery. I'm not sure if that's a thing in other countries as well, but I think it's
Mm.
genius. Basically, they draw postcodes, and then everybody who has a lottery ticket in that with that postcode gets like a lot of money. So like you really don't want to be the one guy in that neighborhood who like didn't have that ticket because then when everybody around you get rich, you like and it's a bit like this, at least for me, a bit this like fear of missing out when it comes to buying houses.
Yeah.
Luckily, I don't have the money to buy a house right now, so like that's not a problem.
Yeah.
But it would affect me.
Is houses the new Bitcoin? That's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, I think then another emotion that for me comes up is like anxiety of like having all this financial commitment, right? And the
Yeah.
reduction in flexibility and the rooting to yourself. And I think that's also then connected to like how likely is your living situation to change in the next 5 years. If you might move, if you might like have children, if you might to kind of like move in with a partner, break up with a partner, whatever it is, like anything that would lead to you having to switch houses. If it's likely in the next 5 years, then probably doesn't make sense because the transaction costs of buying a house is just like
Mm.
so high every single time with notary and taxes and all that stuff that you really only want to do that if you can hold it for long enough.
Yeah. Makes
All
sense.
right. I think that's my thinking of if you should buy a house. Before I wasn't really sure. Now I'm like, I'm really sure. At least in
Yeah.
my situation right now, that it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to buy one. But yeah, I think that really depends on everybody's financial situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I feel similarly. I think I value the freedom higher than the cost of getting a house. I guess for some people it's their like dream and that is their freedom in a way is owning a
Right.
house. I think often there is this other than the financial, which is what we're talking about, but there is this more psychological side where yeah, people their whole dream is to get a house, have a family, all this stuff. Whereas I think others more like freedom and the ability to move easily or change things. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting one.
I think, yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is probably like, I'm not sure how sound this actually is, so like take it with a grain of salt. But like, if you assume somewhat efficient markets, and if you assume that people like take this emotional thing into their decision making of like, I really want to have a house and like feel rooted versus I want this freedom, like whatever. Um, yeah, just maybe try to feel into yourself. And it's like, how much more than average do I think I really
Mm,
want to buy a house? Like independent of all the financial stuff. And if that's less than average, then probably you shouldn't buy a house because other people are kind of paying the premium
paying the premium, yeah.
for based on their desire. Yeah, I'm not sure how valid it is to use efficient market hypotheses here, but it feels like an interesting lens.
I think it's probably a factor, at least. I guess there's other options like buying a house in a cheaper, like, like I do you want a house enough that you're willing to like trade off where you live and like be somewhere where houses are cheaper because, like London versus countryside, as you mentioned, is like completely different costs, like half as much or something crazy like that.
I mean, one thing you can of course always do is buy a house to rent it out, right?
Yeah.
Then this becomes like just another investment, but I think that's not how most people would probably think about it. It's just that like for some reason it's just much easier to get mortgages on houses than it is to get on ETFs. But like I
Mm.
can't now go to the bank and I get like 500,000 mortgage to like buy ETFs with, even though I think that would like often make more sense, right?
Yeah, yeah, true,
So
true.
you kind of tied to this asset class just based on how easy it is to get loans for it. If
Yeah,
you want to make use of that leverage, and I think it like if you kind of are in a financial position where that makes sense, definitely do it, and then you can still rent it out or something.
yeah. I guess I'll say here in the UK, there's also a first buyers like help scheme where I think you can invest, I think like 5K and they'll pay another 5K on top. So like there are some schemes set up also sometimes for buying a house. It's worth looking into if you're considering it.
Yeah, for sure. I think some of these calculators take it into account, but yeah, we'll link to a few.
Great.
Cool.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. That was this episode on Euzoia on should you buy a home. Hopefully you're more informed now. And yeah, we'll be back next week. I think next week we have a new topic, right, Christoph?
It's gonna be all about friends and relationships. It's gonna feel a bit warmer than this finance episode we've been doing for a while now. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah, the cold hard money, people and friends and relationships. So yeah,
Don't
I'm
worry,
excited for
we'll get cold again afterwards.
that. Amazing. Okay,
All right.
I'll see you all next week.
See you next week.